By 1860, nearly 4 million people were enslaved in the United States, forced to create wealth they could never own. When the fields, kitchens, and violence had taken nearly everything, what remained for them to eat? What if the food on America's holiday tables was built from somebody else's hunger? What if collard greens, cornbread, rice, fried cakes, and rich gravies began as ways to stretch one piece of meat, save stale bread, or turn a handful of grain into enough food for a family? The most unsettling question is not why America came to love these flavors. It is why the country remembered the recipes while forgetting the black hands that kept them alive. These dishes later entered cookbooks, restaurants, political dining rooms, luxury stores, and family celebrations. Their creators were often left outside the story. This is Hidden Black Chronicles, and together we bring buried stories back into the light. Today we uncover 10 forgotten soul food recipes enslaved black cooks created to survive. Foods America later learned to crave. Number 1. Southern fried chicken. Long before fried chicken became a favorite at restaurants, it was made in a much harsher world. For an enslaved black family, one chicken could mean a rare meal, a few eggs for the children, or a small sale that helped buy shoes, cloth, or something the plantation refused to provide. Federal Writers Project interviews from Georgia recall that some enslaved people were allowed to raise chickens and sell eggs, butter, or poultry. That income mattered because it was never safe or truly theirs. The enslaver could withdraw permission, limit travel, control the market, or seize the money. A woman cares for a flock every day and still has no legal right to her own body, her children, or the wages created by her labor. Her care for the flock usually began after another exhausting day. She spends the daylight hours in the fields, in the laundry, beside a cradle, or inside the enslaver's kitchen. Only afterward could she gather feed, protect the birds, collect eggs, clean a chicken, and save enough fat for frying. The meal America later celebrated was often prepared during hours when she should have been allowed to rest. Fried chicken was not everyday food for most enslaved people. A hen could keep producing eggs and chicks while frying required valuable fat, steady heat, and time. One bird might be saved for a religious gathering, a family visit, or a sale that could help the household survive another week. The crisp skin later praised on restaurant signs came from careful choices made under hunger, fear, and control. No single person invented fried chicken because the dish grew from African, European, and American traditions. Yet enslaved black cooks helped shape the Southern style through seasoning, timing, and knowledge passed from one kitchen to another. When white families later wrote recipes into cookbooks, the lady of the house was often named, while the black cook who had tested the method for years appeared only as servant, cook, or not at all. After emancipation, that knowledge reached the railroad station in Gordonsville, Virginia. Black women carried trays of fried chicken, biscuits, pies, eggs, coffee, and fruit to passing trains. When a window opened, they lifted the food to travelers and received payment directly. The stop lasted only minutes, but it gave them something slavery had denied: a chance to sell their own work without a white household standing between them and the customer. By 1869, George W. Bagby called Gordonsville the chicken leg center of the universe. A travel account from 1873 described black vendors surrounding the trains, and an 1881 engraving preserved the scene. The town remembered the chicken, but history kept far fewer names of the women who made it famous. The bitter reversal came when survival food became a national craving. Former slaveholding households had eaten meals prepared by black cooks, and later restaurants, travelers, and food companies turned Southern fried chicken into profit. At the same time, Jim Crow advertising used the link between black people and chicken as a racist joke. Years later, Edna Lewis, born in Freetown, Virginia, wrote about Southern food in books carrying her own name. She brought a black woman's voice into a history that had long used black knowledge while forgetting black cooks. For enslaved families, fried chicken could mean survival through another difficult week. For America, the same dish later became comfort, business, and desire. The flavor was preserved, while most of the women who built its value were quietly left out of the story. Number 2. Gumbo. The earliest known Louisiana record of gumbo did not appear in a cookbook or on a restaurant menu. It appeared on September 4, 1764, inside the interrogation of an enslaved African woman named Mama Julie Comba. Comba was about 50 years old, identified herself as belonging to the Mandinga Nation, and lived at the Hospital for the Poor in New Orleans, where Capuchin priests held her in slavery. Colonial officials questioned her about Louis Defoe, César, Louison, Fatima, and other black people who had gathered, shared food, and kept relationships alive beyond the households that claimed them. Inside that cold legal record, officials wrote down the words Gumbo, although they had no interest in preserving a treasured recipe. They were investigating a community that had met outside the boundaries imposed by slavery. Under Louisiana's 1724 Code Noir, enslaved people belonging to different owners could be punished for gathering without permission. A shared meal could therefore draw the attention of courts and police, because people who talked, exchanged news, helped runaways, or simply spent time together were harder to isolate and control. The law did not merely claim their labor. It reached toward their friendships, their movement, and their right to sit beside one another. The surviving document does not tell us what Comba's gumbo contained, so no honest account can add shrimp, sausage, roux, or okra to her pot. What remains is the name, and that name carries a strong African trace. Linguists connect gumbo with West and Central African words for okra, a plant long used to thicken soups and stews. For people living with uncertain rations, a flexible one-pot dish offered practical comfort. Water held flavor, vegetables added substance, and a small amount of fish or meat could season food for several people. Ingredients changed with the season, but the pot allowed scattered pieces to become a warm meal that could be divided fairly. Over time, gumbo absorbed native knowledge of sassafras fillet, European roux techniques, Gulf Coast seafood, Caribbean influence, and generations of Black Creole cooking. By the early 20th century, New Orleans cookbooks presented it as a proud symbol of Creole cuisine. Later, restaurants and celebrity chefs carried gumbo far beyond Louisiana, where Americans learned to crave its rich broth, deep seasoning, and family variations. The contrast became complete in 2004, when Louisiana law declared gumbo the official state cuisine. A colonial legal system had once watched black people gather around such a meal. Another Louisiana law now placed that meal among the state's highest cultural symbols. Comba entered the archive because authorities wanted answers from her, not because they respected her knowledge. More than 2 centuries later, the dish, connected to her testimony, became famous across America, while her name remained buried in a criminal file. Gumbo survived that interrogation, and remembering Mama Comba allows the woman beside the pot to survive with it. Number 3. Slow-cooked collard greens and potlikker. George Strickland was an old man when he remembered how enslaved children were fed cooked greens and potlikker from wooden troughs. They ate with shells, their hands, or pieces of gourd shaped into rough spoons. Decades later, politicians and newspaper editors would argue over the proper way to eat that same broth with cornbread. The distance from a child beside a trough to the dining room of the United States Senate reveals what America celebrated and what it allowed to fade. Collards were not invented by enslaved Africans, and the plant's path into the South has several roots. What black growers and cooks carried was deep knowledge of leafy greens, how to grow them, soften tough leaves, season a large pot with little meat, and save every useful part. In 1781, Lieutenant William Feltman passed through Hanover County, Virginia, and noted that black people there grew large amounts of collards and snap beans. He recorded the crops, but not one person who planted, weeded, harvested, or cooked them. For families living on tightly controlled rations, collards offered something dependable. The plants could survive cold weather, provide leaves over many weeks, and fill a large iron pot. A small piece of salt pork, fatback, or ham could spread its flavor through food for several people. Cornbread made the meal more filling, while the liquid beneath the greens became potlikker, a smoky broth no hungry family could afford to waste. Strickland's memory also shows the cruelty built around that food. The children were not seated together at a family table and served with ordinary care. They were fed in a way that made plantation control quicker and easier. Even so, someone still washed the leaves, watched the fire, prepared the gourds, and tried to keep those children alive, although the records did not preserve that person's name. Potlikker carried salt, fat, smoke, and part of what the greens released while cooking. It softened dry cornbread and stretched one small piece of meat across many hungry mouths. The skill was real, but it was practiced under conditions no family should have been forced to endure. By 1931, the humble broth had entered national newspaper headlines. Editor Julian Harris and Louisiana Governor Huey Long helped turn the proper way to eat potlikker and cornbread into a newspaper debate lasting about 23 days. Long later promoted the dish in the Senate dining room and praised it on the Senate floor. A broth, once served to enslaved children in wooden troughs, had become a symbol of Southern pride for men holding political power. Today, chefs such as Carla Hall and J.J. Johnson build entire dishes around potlikker, while seed savers protect old collard varieties carried by families for generations. America now craves the smoky greens, soft cornbread, and rich broth at the bottom of the pot. George Strickland's childhood reminds us that black families understood its value long before the country decided it was worth celebrating. Number 4. Cornbread, ash cake, and hoe cakes. Frederick Douglass remembered 2 ash cakes that looked almost the same, but carried completely different meanings. One was a plantation ration eaten quickly in the field, so an enslaved laborer could keep working. The other was baked at midnight by the free black wife of Sandy, who risked punishment to feed Douglass while he hid from a violent enslaver. The ingredients were nearly identical, but the hands around the fire changed everything. Cornbread did not begin inside the kitchens of Southern slave plantations. Indigenous nations, including the Choctaw and Chickasaw, had grown, stored, ground, and cooked corn for generations before European colonization. Plantation owners later turned cornmeal into a cheap ration because it was easy to measure, difficult to spoil, and convenient to carry into distant fields. Douglass wrote that workers on Edward Lloyd's Maryland plantation sometimes labored 2 or 3 miles from their quarters. Their midday meal could be one large ash cake with a small piece of pork or 2 salted herrings. Behind the great house, however, black cooks prepared poultry, butter, cream, seafood, and other rich foods for the slaveholding family. Ash cake looked simple because most of its hardship remained hidden from view. Someone still had to grind the corn, gather wood, build a fire, mix the dough, wrap it in leaves, and bury it beneath hot ashes after an exhausting day. One fugitive's 1838 account described falling asleep before making his bread and rushing to the field the next morning carrying raw corn. That is why Douglass never forgot the ash cake made in Sandy's home. It was not handed to him to keep another man's plantation running. It was prepared by people who saw his hunger, sheltered him, and shared what little they had. After slavery ended, cornbread slowly entered a very different American world. In 1866, Melinda Russell, a free black woman from Tennessee, published an Indian meal batter bread recipe using eggs, sour milk, lard, flour, and baking soda. For once, a black woman's name stood beside her own knowledge. America later filled cornbread with butter, milk, eggs, sugar, and family pride, then placed it beside barbecue, greens, holiday turkey, and church suppers. The country learned to crave the warm crust and soft center, while rarely remembering the people who once ate ash cake in a field because their labor mattered more to the plantation than their hunger. Number 5. Hoppin' John. Today, many Americans eat Hoppin' John on New Year's Day and hope the peas will bring money, luck, and a better year. The dish grew in a region where enslaved Africans created enormous rice wealth, yet were denied wages, land, and control over the food their labor produced. Cowpeas had been grown in Africa for thousands of years, while many West Africans carried deep knowledge of rice farming and one-pot meals across the Atlantic. In the Carolina Lowcountry, enslavers forced that knowledge into a plantation economy built on swamp labor, flooded fields, and relentless work. Rice filled warehouses and ships, but the people who made that trade possible often relied on rice, peas, and a little salted pork to feed their families. The meal worked because dried peas lasted. Rice absorbed every bit of flavor, and one small piece of meat could season an entire pot. Black cooks were making restricted ingredients stretch far enough to keep people alive. By 1838, Hoppin had appeared in print as a tasty but unfashionable dish. In 1847, Sarah Rutledge published a recipe using bacon, red peas, and rice. Although the Lowcountry foodway had existed long before, her book gave it a white author's name. The dish later moved far beyond the quarters and family kitchens where it had been preserved. Visitors tasted it at the Atlanta Exposition in 1895, and President William Howard Taft was served Hoppin' John in Charleston in 1909. Over time, it became a New Year symbol of prosperity across America. The contrast remains inside every bowl. A meal once used to stretch scarce food is now eaten as a wish for abundance, while the black families whose knowledge helped build Lowcountry fortunes were never allowed to share equally in that wealth. Number 6. Kush or Kush Kush did not disappear from America. Its name nearly did. Today, its descendant sits beside turkey at Thanksgiving as cornbread dressing, rich with broth, onions, herbs, and butter. Long before that holiday comfort reached crowded family tables, enslaved black cooks used cornmeal, grease, water, and whatever seasoning they could find to make one small ration feed more people. Julius Nelson, interviewed in 1937, remembered Kush as meal cooked with onions, salt, pepper, grease, and water. Anna Wright recalled a version her mother described, made by crumbling griddle-baked cornbread with raw onion and pouring ham gravy over it. Their memories show that Kush was never one fixed recipe. It changed according to what a family had, yet its purpose remained clear. Soften dry bread, save every drop of fat, and turn scraps of flavor into a warm supper. The name may preserve a distant memory of West African grain dishes, although its exact origin remains uncertain. What is clearer is how quickly the method traveled. Confederate soldiers later ate a similar dish called kush or slosh during the Civil War. Printed military stories helped their version survive, while the names of black women who had cooked it for generations remained far harder to find. Over time, kush changed shape. Cornbread was broken into broth, mixed with onions, herbs, meat drippings, and later eggs or butter, then baked into the dressing. Many Americans now expect at Thanksgiving and Christmas. The transformation carried a quiet cruelty. A dish, created to keep families alive under controlled rations, became a beloved symbol of abundance, served beside tables crowded with food. America kept the cornbread, the gravy, and the comforting smell from the oven. It nearly forgot the word kush, along with the people who first taught the South how nothing edible should ever be wasted. Number 7. Sweet potato pone and sweet potato pie. Before sweet potato pie became a holiday favorite, enslaved black families met the root in a much harsher form. A sweet potato could be baked in hot ashes, boiled, mashed, or turned into a dense pone when flour, eggs, milk, and ovens were beyond reach. Sweet potatoes came from the Americas, while true yams belonged to a plant family long familiar in West Africa. Enslaved Africans did not invent the root, but recognized how it could be cooked, stored, softened, and stretched into meals that helped families endure restricted rations. The sharpest contrast appeared inside plantation kitchens, where a black cook might prepare pies with butter, eggs, sugar, milk, and pastry for the enslaver's table, then return to a family meal made from the same root with fewer ingredients. The difference came from who controlled the pantry, the oven, and the cook's time, not from lack of skill. In 1881, Abby Fisher, a woman born into slavery, published a sweet potato pie recipe under her own name. Her version used butter, 5 eggs, milk, sugar, orange peel, and a bottom crust. The recipe showed pastry knowledge and placed a black woman's authority directly on the printed page. 2 decades later, Mary McLeod Bethune used sweet potato pies in a fight for freedom. After opening a school for black girls in Daytona in 1904, she sold pies and ice cream, organized concerts, and asked neighbors for support. Those small sales helped her buy land and expand the school. What once filled an empty stomach later filled holiday tables across America. The route had helped families survive, while the pie became a source of income, education, and pride. America learned to crave its warm spice and soft filling, though the women who carried it from hardship to celebration were remembered less often. These dishes survived hunger, violence, and generations of silence, then returned to America as comfort, celebration, and pride. Yet how many hands remain unnamed behind the flavors we love? Subscribe to Hidden Black Chronicles and help us bring their courage, memory, and rightful place in history back into the light together.